She wore a faded military flight jacket, worn seal patch barely visible on the sleeve. Stepping into first class, she was pushed away. "Economy ticket means go downstairs. This isn't your place." Elena bowed her head, clutching her canvas bag, retreating to the back row, eyes sad. Halfway through the flight, engine explosion echoed. "Engine failure!" The intercom crackled. Male SEAL pilot's voice. "Elena Ward, come to the cockpit. Your seat is here." The cabin fell silent. Elena Ward, 32 years old. Thin frame, long brown hair tied back, wearing her deceased brother's old flight jacket, a fallen SEAL. On the sleeve, a faded seal patch, threads coming loose in places. Passengers looked at her with irritated expressions. Why wear military gear on a civilian flight? When she politely asked to sit in first class because she carried special memorabilia, the flight attendant responded coldly. "Sorry, you have an economy ticket. Please return to your section." A businessman laughed mockingly. "A flight jacket won't buy you a first-class seat." Elena bit her lip, didn't respond, retreating to the back row, clutching her canvas bag tightly. Inside the bag was her brother's old flight logbook, corners burned from the battlefield. Throughout the flight, she remained kind, adjusting seat belts for elderly passengers, offering water to a crying child. But mocking glances still followed the old flight jacket. The other passengers didn't understand what they were seeing. To them, Elena looked like someone playing dress-up in military gear she hadn't earned. What they couldn't see was the weight she carried. Every morning, she put on that jacket, like armor against a world that had taken everything from her. Her brother Marcus had been more than family. He'd been her mentor, her protector, the one who taught her that service meant sacrifice. He'd died saving his team in Afghanistan, but not before teaching Elena everything he knew about aviation. Hours in flight simulators, endless lessons about emergency procedures, detailed explanations of aircraft systems. "You never know when this might save someone's life," he'd tell her. She'd thought he was just sharing his passion. She never imagined she'd need those skills. The flight jacket wasn't a costume, it was a promise, a reminder of who Marcus had been and what he'd stood for. Elena wore it because it kept him close, because it reminded her that heroes often worked quietly, without recognition, without glory. The passengers saw outdated military gear. Elena felt her brother's presence. She'd requested the first-class upgrade not for comfort, but because she needed space for the logbook. It was fragile, irreplaceable, filled with Marcus's handwriting from missions she'd never fully understand. The airline's refusal had stung, but Elena was used to disappointment, used to being overlooked, dismissed, treated as less important than she was. She'd learned to endure it with grace. Marcus had taught her that dignity wasn't about how others treated you. It was about how you treated others, especially when they couldn't help you in return. So she helped the elderly passenger with her seatbelt, comforted the crying child, smiled at people who looked at her with suspicion. A fellow passenger would later recall, "She held that bag like it contained her life." The faded flight jacket made people laugh, but I saw pride in it. Elena Ward was about to prove that sometimes the person you dismiss is exactly the person you need. A massive explosion echoed from the right engine, the aircraft shaking violently. The cabin plunged into darkness, red warning lights flashing, ground disappearing far below. Screams erupted. "Engine failure! We're going down!" Flight attendants panicked. Passengers screamed. Some covered their faces and cried. Elena remained gripped to her seat, hand clutching the patch on her jacket. Her eyes showed calm, completely different from the crowd around her. In the cockpit, Captain James Cole, the pilot, former SEAL aviator, controlled the yoke. A backup engine was also showing failure warnings. James scanned the passenger manifest, his eyes stopping at Elena Ward. His heart pounded. Ward was the surname of his teammate who'd died in Helmand, the man who'd saved his life. James opened the intercom, his voice booming, "Elena Ward, come to the cockpit. Your seat is here." The entire cabin fell silent. Passengers looked at each other, then focused on the woman in the old flight jacket. Elena stood up, holding her bag, walking toward the front. A flight attendant panicked. "No!" Passengers can't enter the cockpit. The cockpit door opened, James looking directly at her. She comes in. Immediately. Elena stepped inside, the door closing behind her, the cabin completely quiet. But this wasn't just about emergency assistance. This was about a debt that had never been repaid. James recognized more than just the surname. He remembered Marcus Ward, the SEAL who'd pulled him from a burning helicopter in Afghanistan, the man who died 3 days later, saving another team. Marcus had talked about his sister during their few quiet moments. "She knows aircraft better than most pilots," he'd said. "I taught her everything." James had promised Marcus that if anything happened to him, he'd look out for Elena. But after Marcus's death, Elena had disappeared from military circles. James never found her. Until today. The aircraft shuddered again, another system failing. James needed help, and Elena might be the only person on the plane who could provide it. "Your brother saved my life," James said, his hands working the controls. "Today, I need yours." Elena's voice was steady despite the chaos. "What do you need me to do?" James had been trained for emergencies, but this was beyond normal protocols. Multiple system failures, backup systems compromised, weather conditions deteriorating. He needed a co-pilot, and Elena was the closest thing to one on the aircraft. "Can you read a checklist?" James asked. Elena nodded, pulling out Marcus's logbook. The pages were filled with emergency procedures, handwritten notes from years of military flying. She'd studied these pages countless times, never knowing why. Now she understood. Marcus had been preparing her for this moment. James handed her a headset. Elena put it on, the red warning lights illuminating the SEAL patch on her jacket. She opened the logbook, reading clearly, each step precise. Fuel, crossfeed, open. Throttle, idle. APU start sequence. James followed her instructions. Elena managing secondary systems, resetting backup power. The cabin still shook, but the aircraft maintained altitude. Radio chatter exploded. "Flight 417, do you have control?" James responded, "Affirmative." Thanks to her. Elena whispered, "My brother taught me, never abandon the cockpit until you bring everyone home." James gritted his teeth, replying, "Today, that promise lives again." A flight attendant would later remember, "He called her by name, looked at her like he was seeing the past. I knew it wasn't just technical support, but a debt being repaid." Inside the cockpit, warning lights flashed constantly, gauges shook violently, the entire aircraft trembling. James turned to Elena. "Your brother saved my life. Today, I need your hands." Elena trembled slightly, but quickly steadied herself. She'd been trained by Marcus for hours in flight simulators, knew how to read basic checklists. James handed her a headset. Elena put it on, red light reflecting off the SEAL patch on her jacket. She opened the old logbook, reading clearly through each step. Fuel, crossfeed, open. Throttle, idle. APU, start. James operated controls, while Elena managed auxiliary power, reset systems. The cabin still shook, but the aircraft maintained altitude. Radio communications flooded in. Flight 417. Do you maintain control? James replied, Affirmative. Because of her. Elena whispered, My brother always taught me, never leave the cockpit until you bring everyone home. James clenched his jaw, responding, Today, that promise lives again. But the crisis was far from over. The aircraft had lost primary hydraulics. Backup electrical systems were failing, and they were still 40 minutes from the nearest airport. Elena studied Marcus's logbook, finding emergency procedures she'd memorized but never thought she'd use. James, she said, using his first name for the first time, there's a procedure here for dual-engine failure over mountainous terrain. Show me. Elena read from Marcus's handwritten notes. Reduce airspeed to minimum controllable. Maximize glide ratio. Identify emergency landing sites. James nodded, recognizing the advanced techniques Marcus had developed during special operations flights. Outside the cockpit, passengers remained silent, understanding that their lives depended on whatever was happening behind that closed door. Elena's calm voice continued over the intercom as she read checklists. Landing gear manual extension. Flaps to approach configuration. Emergency fuel dump initiated. Her voice carried the same steady authority Marcus had possessed. The same unshakable focus under pressure. James realized that Elena wasn't just reading procedures. She understood them. Marcus had taught her not just what to do, but why to do it. How much flight training do you have? James asked. Hundreds of hours in simulators, Marcus insisted. He said pilots need backups for their backups. He was right. The aircraft began its approach to the emergency runway. Elena continued reading procedures while James flew, their teamwork seamless despite having never worked together before. Cabin crew, prepare for emergency landing, James announced. Elena's voice followed. All passengers, brace positions. We're bringing everyone home. The same words Marcus had used on his final mission. As they descended, Elena noticed something in her logbook she'd never seen before. A note in Marcus's handwriting tucked between pages. Elena, if you're reading this during an emergency, remember, you were born for this moment. Trust your training. Trust yourself. Bring them home. Marcus. Tears blurred her vision momentarily, but she blinked them away. There would be time for grief later. Now, she had work to do. Final approach checklist, she called out. Completed, James responded. The aircraft touched down hard on the emergency runway, bounced once, then settled into a long, controlled slide. Fire trucks and ambulances waited alongside the runway. When the aircraft finally stopped, the cabin erupted in tears of relief. James opened the cockpit door, pulling Elena out with him. He pointed to her. We're alive because of her. Every eye in the cabin focused on the old flight jacket, the seal patch now clearly visible under the emergency lighting. Passengers began crying, many applauding. Elena bowed her head, tears falling onto the patch. James whispered, Marcus saved me years ago. Today, his sister saved all of us. The old flight jacket hadn't been outdated military gear after all. It had been a uniform worn by someone ready to serve when service was needed most. Elena had honored her brother's memory in the most perfect way possible, by using his training to save lives. In the airport cafeteria later, Elena sat with hot soup, still wearing the faded flight jacket. James sat across from her, silently placing black coffee in front of her. Elena smiled slightly. Marcus always drank black coffee. Thank you for keeping the promise." The aircraft shuddered and banked toward the emergency runway. James gripped the controls. Elena read the checklist decisively. Landing gear touched down hard, striking the runway, the plane sliding long distances, but finally coming to a stop. The cabin exploded in tears, then fell completely silent when the cockpit door opened. James pulled Elena out, pointing to her. "We're alive. Because of her." All eyes focused on the old flight jacket, the seal patch glowing under emergency lighting. Passengers broke into tears, many applauding. Elena bowed her head, tears falling on the patch. James whispered, "Marcus saved me years ago. Today, his sister saved all of us." In the airport cafeteria, Elena sat with hot soup, still wearing the faded flight jacket. James sat across from her, saying nothing, just quietly placing black coffee in front of her. Elena smiled gently. "My brother always loved black coffee. Thank you for honoring the promise." The conversation was comfortable, respectful. Two people who understood that some debts transcend time and circumstance. "Elena," James said finally, "Marcus talked about you constantly. He said you were the strongest person he knew. He was wrong. He was the strong one. Number strength isn't just about combat. It's about carrying on when the person you love most is gone." Elena looked at the patch on her jacket. "I wear this because I don't want to forget what service means." "You didn't just remember it today. You lived it." The airport was bustling with activity. Emergency crews, media, passengers calling families to report their safe arrival. But in that quiet corner, two people sat sharing coffee and honoring the memory of someone who'd taught them both what heroism really meant. "Will you keep flying?" Elena asked. "Will you?" James countered. Elena considered this. Marcus always said that once you know how to save lives, you have a responsibility to keep doing it. He was right about that, too. Other passengers approached their table throughout the evening, not to ask questions or take photos, but simply to say, "Thank you." Elena accepted their gratitude with the same quiet dignity she'd shown when they dismissed her hours earlier. She'd learned from Marcus that recognition wasn't the reward for service. Service was its own reward. The old flight jacket had protected her from more than cold. It had protected her from a world that often forgot the value of quiet dedication. Today, that dedication had saved 247 lives. Elena Ward had finally found her place in first class, not in a luxury seat, but in the cockpit where heroes belong. Some people are dismissed for wearing old clothes, pushed away from prestigious places. But when life or death moments arrive, they're the ones who save hundreds of lives. Elena Ward was just a passenger denied first-class seating, but the old military flight jacket on her shoulders was a promise that never fades. Honor seats aren't found in first class. They're found in cockpits, where someone dares to sit and preserve life for everyone. Her story reminds us that true worth isn't measured by the price of your ticket, but by your willingness to serve when service is needed most. The heroes around us often wear faded clothes and carry old memories. They've learned that recognition isn't the goal. Responsibility is. Elena kept her brother's promise in the most perfect way, by using his training to bring everyone home safely. Sometimes the person you overlook is exactly the person who will save your life. If you believe in quiet stories like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to SN Quiet Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.